it's very interesting to see the role of some of these key players in this space, especially as the U.S.-China tech war ramps up amidst a trade war and a broader set of tensions between the two countries. Huawei, along with other companies now like DeepSeek, have been pulled into this sort of new national team, as we saw in a meeting with President Xi Jinping and a number of the tech leaders. These private companies are sort of the vanguard for China's push into the new industries of the future. So for everything from electric vehicles, advanced semiconductors, AI, there's sort of a whole range of emerging industries that where China hopes to become a major player, if not a global leader.
As we look at names like Huawei, they're under severe restrictions by the United States. And of course, China wanting to use this to their advantage to make their own tech industry or their semiconductor industry stronger. Have they been successful at that?
They've been more successful than I think many might have expected from the outside, at least. Huawei, in particular, has played a really central role in China's industrial policy, going back to the early days when China was trying to move away from importing foreign telecom equipment from companies like Ericsson that are now seen as behind Huawei in some areas of 5G technology. More recently now, Huawei has taken the lead in terms of especially helping to organize, even to dispatch task forces of engineers to basically conduct what I call a Manhattan Project style effort to boost China's self-reliance in semiconductors. So you have Huawei as the central node across this broader network of semiconductor companies, semiconductor manufacturing equipment makers, all trying to work together in a more coordinated fashion to overcome some of the export restrictions that the U.S. has been leading in along with its partners. So I think at this point, we've been surprised enough times that we might want to sort of update our expectations for what a company like Huawei can do in this space. I think there's a lot of questions still about, testing to see the sort of real-world performance of its latest Ascend chips, to see how well they work with for AI models. It's not just a simple matter of sort of mixing and matching hardware with software. There's a lot of firmware, platform compatibility, software libraries that need to be built out and rolled out on a broader scale. So there's a lot of question marks here still, but I think it's a very interesting and more competitive space than we might have expected even just a few years ago.
As we look at industrial diplomacy on China's part and some of the names, like you've been talking about Huawei, are there any other budding companies that have caught your eye or that we should be paying attention to?
So there are some that are already marquee names, like BYD is playing such a huge role in spearheading this global expansion of Chinese supply chains all across the world. We're talking about Latin America, Southeast Asia, Europe, even a bit here and there in the U.S. Of course, that's another set of question marks. And you see this broader effort where there's a combination of both commercial interests. So some of these companies, especially in the EV space, Leap Motor forming partnerships, even XPeng working with Volkswagen. So you have some of these companies who are seeking to make more money in new markets. Simple as that. At the same time, though, the reason why I use this term industrial diplomacy is that this is not a purely sort of free market phenomenon. And along the way, Beijing is trying to steer, I argue, some of the investment towards countries that are perhaps friendlier to China, perhaps more open to working with China as almost a sort of geopolitical tool. And I think what's interesting is to see this sort of as a set of potential carrots and sticks in the sense that manufacturing investment from some of these companies, from some of these Chinese companies around the world, is now seen as something very valuable, something that they really are eager to bring in. Especially even, Southeast Asian countries are looking for, like Thailand and Malaysia are looking to build up their EV industries, for example, and they see Chinese EV makers as a potential way to bridge the gap in technology, for example, and production capacity. You even have European countries eager to have Chinese EV plants built in their own countries, provided that the jobs are there and that the technology might even be shared. There were some remarks by EU Council members to that effect. So what we have here is this interesting combination of both commercial interests driving this global expansion, but also it being shaped by Beijing's sort of foreign policy priorities.
I'm taking note that Hungary is the largest recipient of Chinese FDI in the EU. Brazil is the same for Latin America, but there are countries that China doesn't want to do business with or is trying to avoid business with. Could you name some of them?
Yeah, so I mentioned the Philippines has always been a more difficult place, I think, for Chinese investment for a bunch of reasons. And I think there's a sense that there's an effort to kind of hold back a bit on the Philippines. But the most prominent country is India. And India is very special for a number of reasons. Number one, it's a much bigger country, much larger than, say, Vietnam or Malaysia, where you do have a lot of Chinese supply chains expanding into. India, possibly, especially given its current push into manufacturing itself. India is right now going through a major industrial policy push to become the next China. India presents a potential challenge in the long run if they can bring over greater foreign direct investment and bolster their own manufacturing capabilities. It could be a potential rival to China in this space in a way that countries of smaller scale might not be. But perhaps the most salient factor here are the geopolitical tensions between the two countries. There have always been sort of rocky periods, but I think things really came to a head with the Galwan Valley clash in 2020 and during the pandemic. And what you had was, up until then, actually fairly strong Chinese investment in India up until that point, but then a sudden chilling in the relationship between the two countries, leading to a whole series of sort of back and forth, almost kind of a mini decoupling as a preview for what might be happening later on with sort of U.S.-China relations, where India banned TikTok. India banned a whole bunch of Chinese apps on India platforms, and Chinese investment found it much harder to operate in India, and Beijing seemed to be pulling back and telling its companies to be cautious. There were efforts by companies like BYD to continue to try to build, say, a new EV plant in India. And there were national security concerns from the Indian side about these Chinese investments. So going forward, what has been especially striking to me is the extent to which, now confirmed by a number of reports, it appears that Chinese equipment and Chinese personnel involved with iPhone production have been slowed or delayed or blocked from going from China to India. And this is really critical because right now, Apple is making this big push to shift a large share, as much of a share of its iPhone production as it can, as quickly as possible, given the risks with U.S. tariffs in particular. And so this process had been actually fairly robust up until now, this process of expanding iPhone production in India, to the extent where I think some of the latest figures were roughly 20% of all iPhones were made in India, or getting close to that point. And I think perhaps this may have been surprising and worrying to policymakers in Beijing, fearing that if this trend continued, they could lose their hold on a really important and crucial product and ecosystem that is organized around the iPhone. And so I could see this effort as being part of a broader effort to shape, who gets what technology, who gets what equipment from China even, and who might partake and benefit from China's broader global supply chain expansion, and who might China or Beijing want to deprioritize in this process.